let's jump into the wide receivers here. CeeDee Lamb leads the list. I think we could just almost stop right there, Matthew. CeeDee Lamb over, but followed by Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. Your previous ride or die, a good choice, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Puka Nacua makes the top 10, A.J. Brown, Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Chris Olave, but CeeDee Lamb, Mr. Number 1.
Yeah, I mean, I call him 8,
well,
but
he's
my buddy, my buddy 8.
I call him CeeDee Lamb.
But we may have to call him Mr. Number 1. I think the argument is like, and listen, if you're in a draft and with me and I see Tyreek Hill's the first guy off the board or Jamar Chase, like I'm obviously not going to be like, well, what are you doing there? But
panic pick.
The argument for CeeDee Lamb at number 1 is a couple of different things. First off, again, to be the number 1 player at a position, you don't have to finish the year at number 1 to be worth that. It's more about floor. Like, you don't want to screw that up. I mean, again, we saw it with Jefferson and Jamar Chase last year, who missed significant amounts of time. So I think the floor with CeeDee Lamb is just so insanely high. When you think about what this Cowboys team did in the offseason, which is nothing. They let Michael Gallup go. You know, they didn't sign a significant running back, all due respect to Zeke. I mean, CeeDee Lamb had 135 receptions last year. He had a 30% target share. He had at least 10 targets in 9 of his final 11 games. And this is a team that's just going to have to throw all the time. And, like, it's CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks and Jake Ferguson. Like, honestly, like, they didn't add any target competition for CeeDee Lamb. They didn't add anything in the backfield. Dak Prescott is back. Like, 135 receptions last year. So I just think, barring something health-wise, I don't see how CeeDee Lamb isn't a top 3 fantasy wide receiver this year. And so just that floor and volume and his obvious talent makes me feel like, he's the easy case for number 1.
Yeah, I think the other floor factors too. One, just playing in the dome, playing in Jerry World. That the fact that he doesn't have to deal with weather like Jamar Chase does, for instance, that's big. The other thing too is Dak Prescott. Outside of when he breaks his leg in a freak accident, basically, doesn't get hurt. Dak Prescott very solid on that front. Dak also coming off his best season. And CeeDee Lamb, I mean, he got better as the season wore on last year too. He's still young, doesn't get hurt. They move him around in different areas. It's great. I think I always look for floor with receivers in guys who can go into the slot, because that is just such a matchup shaker. The fact that if you can go inside into the slot like CeeDee Lamb can, it really changes the game.
He's matchup proof once he does that as well. And to your point about Dak Prescott, as long as you're not in a fantasy playoff league, you know what I mean? Like, no, but Dak is a very good regular season quarterback. Jokes aside, he is, and he will get the ball to CeeDee Lamb. Again, we talk about floor. 75% of his games last year, CeeDee Lamb had at least 15 or more fantasy points. Just week in, week out consistency. His talent and that offense and lack of target competition. CeeDee Lamb is my number 1 fantasy football wide receiver.
I was talking to a buddy of mine who's a professional bettor and talking about how, the idea that certain guys, they choke in the playoffs, like that doesn't get based into lines. Like that's more just the narrative thing. But he was like, I think I'm at the point where I need to account for this with Dak Prescott because it's every single year.
Every year.
Which is a shame. And to be fair, he was awesome against Tom Brady in Brady's last game against the Bucs in a playoff game. Dak was awesome. Not awesome the following week against the Niners. Not awesome against Green Bay. But it's sad. I mean, Dak's got a 100% approval rating. Everyone loves Dak. Everyone wants Dak to succeed. It's just in these playoff games, seems to get a little tight.
He is, by all accounts, an awesome human being. Like
Walter Payton Man of the Year.
Awesome. By all accounts, a awesome human being. I've met him once briefly for like 30 seconds, and he couldn't have been more pleasant, in the very brief time that I met him. I did think, did you see Brady at the upfronts? Like, just take a random shot at Tom Brady, just like a random shot at Dak, because he's calling the Cowboys game. Like, so we'll see. I feel bad for Dak. It would be nice. Like, I mean, listen, I'm a Commanders fan, so I hate the Cowboys, but on a personal level, like, you
maybe
do root for Dak. Maybe
he needs to turn heel. Maybe he needs to be less nice.
Maybe that's the issue. But regardless of his playoff success or lack thereof, the fact of the matter is that Dak Prescott is going to get the ball to CeeDee Lamb early and often in scoring situations many, many, many times next year.
Justin Jefferson at number 4, Matthew. Is this largely because of the uncertainty at the quarterback position for the Vikings?
I think it's a combination of both the uncertainty at the quarterback position and slightly increased target share. I mean, again, you have to compare him to Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, right, and CeeDee Lamb. Like, so you have to nitpick here. He's got the worst quarterback of the 4 of them. He's got, target competition from Jordan Addison and Hawkinson when he comes back. And he's not bulletproof. I mean, last year, significant injury, and now you have to factor that in. Like, was that a fluke, or suddenly is injury into his profile?
Yeah.
Like,
the fact that it was a hamstring as well, that concerns you a bit more.
Lingers,
the soft tissue stuff, as opposed to had he just, broken his wrist or something, that would be, more flukish. But Jefferson, I mean, before that, he was very healthy for the majority of his career, but does introduce a little bit more uncertainty. Why does the graphic say El Jefe? Have we called Jefferson El Jefe? I've never heard that in my life.
Well,
Pro Football Reference nickname?
We're doing that now.
El Jefe?
But also, by the way,
that's not a thing.
I think this is
Who put this together?
Damien probably.
Jay's on a warpath.
Yeah, exactly.
El Jefe.
Penn State Blake's final gift.
Yeah, exactly.
This graphic.
I'll tell you right now. El Jefe is going to become a thing on this
yes,
show.
100%. He's never going back.
I'm going to make it. But look,
I like that you both are saying Jefe, by the way.
Yeah.
I know it's in Spanish, it's El Jefe,
Jefe.
but this isn't a word. That's not a
It's
Spanish
just a
word. It's
Jefferson.
a second F.
Jefferson.
Thus, it becomes a new word.
So the important part, though, of that graphic, other than the fact that, yes, El Jefe is his nickname. I don't know where you've been, but everyone calls him El Jefe. His mom has since he was a little kid. Everyone knows this. Was that the numbers there? Those were Justin Jefferson's numbers without Kirk Cousins, and they were all very impressive. He is somewhat quarterback proof, but when you're at this level, you have to start nitpicking, and so you got to put them in some sort of order. And so, if you're sitting there, Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase, you'd rather a guy catching passes from their Joe Burrow than a rookie, right? You're Justin Jefferson or Tirico Hill. You'd rather the guy catching passes from Tua and getting plays called by Mike McDaniel than the guy catching passes from a rookie. Even though I like Kevin O'Connell as a play caller. And it's
not Caleb Williams. Like, this wasn't the first quarterback off the board as well. There's questions around J.J. McCarthy.
And by the way, it might be Sam Darnold.
It very well could be.
It is not like we feel very confident that Jane Daniels is going to start, right? That we know Caleb Williams is going to start. I feel pretty confident that Bo Nix is going to start.
Yeah.
I don't know that we don't know yet in terms of Drake May or J.J. McCarthy if they're the starter week 1.
Yeah, and we know Michael Penix is not.
We certainly know Michael Penix is not.
Yeah. It's kind of a tough saying for Kevin O'Connell. He went through 3 quarterbacks at the end of last year. None of them were any good, and now he goes through. Now he's got 2 more. It's like, these guys any good either? He might go through 5 quarterbacks in a row, and none of them.
I think McCarthy landed in the. You're much obviously deeper talent evaluator than I am, and so you've studied a lot more McCarthy tape than I have at this point. But I feel like, and if he went to a different situation, I might feel differently. But going to Minnesota, where you've got a coach in Kevin O'Connell, a former pro quarterback, Kevin O'Connell as well, and somebody that has developed quarterbacks and worked with Stafford, and I feel like that's a good landing spot. He's having Jefferson and Hawkinson and Addison, it's an unbelievable landing spot for a guy that isn't going to have to be able to, carry the load the way some other quarterbacks have in previous years, where you're just Justin Fields, when he went to the Bears, it was just like, sorry dude, it's all you. Figure it out. Right?
It's McCarthy's best landing spot.
Correct.
By far. The last one we want to talk about on this list here, Matthew, in the top 10, Puka Nacua comes in at number 6. Just an unbelievable, historic rookie season for Puka Nacua. And now,
Jay Croucher's best friend. Did you ever see the picture of just Jay Croucher and Puka Nacua?
And you and I, nowhere to be found.
Nowhere to be found. It's
we weren't even
weird.
on the interview.
Listen.
We'd already done. We were sitting next to Jay.
It was a 4-man desk, but it was a 2-man show. And so me and Puka
just hanging out.
Yeah.
For a while. Is he still your avatar on Twitter?
He is, and he will continue to be.
Quite some time.
Yeah. Unless he falls off a cliff this season.
Jay only updates after Super Bowl Radio Row Week.
Yeah,
Kittle, he was with George Kittle for a year. Now it's with Puka Nacua
I've got
for
some
a
other
year.
good content. Like if Saquon Barkley goes off, then all of a sudden I got a little one where I can clip where I'm next to him as well. Can cut Matthew out.
Yeah, exactly.
Really.
Next year we're gonna switch it up so that you're
the far guy.
You're the far guy.
Yeah. Yes.
And so then what you'll have to do is you'll take a picture and it'll just put black dots over our faces. So it's just
blur.
just blur it out. So how some of the cameras they'll say you can blur with some of those phones, with new phones, pixel us out. So it'll just look like you're hanging with just you and Puka, but it's COVID times because you're going to be so far apart because you have to wipe out me and Connor in between.
It's not.
There you go. Here's the photo.
Yeah. You would never know.
You never know that literally Jay and I, as Connor and I, are sitting next to Jay Croucher. This is
man show.
Yeah, exactly.
And they both leaned in together, which made it way worse for us, Matthew.
We're
just there somewhere.
No, it's
outrageous.
Beautiful.
We'll have to call in Emmett Smith and have his take on if this is
I got a photo
foul
of just
play
me and
or
Emmett
not.
as well.
Yes, I'm sure you did.
I would say.
What's going to be great is tomorrow night when Jay posts just him and Kristen in a wedding dress. He's going to take a picture with
Great
the two
time
of
at the
you
wedding.
guys.
Yeah.
Great time at the wedding, and it's just going to be him and Kristen.
Yeah.
Checks out.
No.
Yeah.
No, it'd be like Kristen, Connor, me, and Bart Scott, and I'll cut out Kristen and Connor. me
Great
and
time
Bart.
at Connor and Kristen's wedding.
Yeah. That's great.
It's lovely.
No, my biggest advice, though, we were talking about marriage advice before. Biggest single advice, you really need to value and play the seating arrangement and the standing arrangement. It's so key. And I manifested that at the Super Bowl Radio Row. But if you're in a seating arrangement or a standing arrangement and there's a girl that you want to talk to or a boy you want to talk to, you need to maneuver that situation to get in the optimal spot, because you can sink. You can absolutely sink just by virtue of a wrong seating or standing arrangement.
That's all very good advice. I agree with that.
Jay will be at the wedding 8 hours early to avoid sitting next to you.
Yeah, sure.
That's basically what you've been told.
Totally fine. That's good.
All right, so Puka Nacua, great rookie season, comes in at number 6. What else needs to be said?
So 12 games. We all know those monster games that Puka had when Kupp was out, right? And he became a thing. But I think what's important is you look at the 12 games in which Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp played together. In those 12 games in which Cooper Kupp was on the field, Puka Nacua still had a 27% target share. He averaged 15.7 fantasy points per game, which was good enough for wide receiver 12 on a points per game basis. And now it's second year in the league. They know what Puka can do. And the fact is that the offensive line is better. Stafford is back. They added Demarcus Robinson as well. Like, this offense basically returns intact. But now I have Puka over Cooper Kupp. I mean, he's still my little Cooper Kupp, but let's be clear. It feels like if you're drafting a Rams wide receiver, I don't know how you don't have Nacua over Kupp, given the injury history of Kupp and sort of what Nacua did last year.
Yeah, so that is the question with Kupp, because Kupp's not in this top 10. He's not going to be on the next screen either in the top 20. Now, Cooper Kupp is 2 years younger than Connor, and Connor looks like he's 19 years old. So Cooper Kupp, are we just writing him off? Like, is he just going?
No, we're not writing him off, but there's now, I mean, he's 2 years in a row, he's had health issues, and he now has target competition, whereas he didn't before. He still has number one wide receiver in fantasy upside. We've seen that before. We've seen that in recent memory. But I don't think you're writing him off, and I think he's going to be a popular sleeper in terms of because of where he's going to go in drafts and where he's currently going in drafts among ADP. But there is risk with Cooper Kupp that wasn't there before because of the emergence of Nacua and because of the injuries the last 2 years.
Yep. And again with Kupp, soft tissue.
Soft tissue, exactly.
That's you don't want.
Right.
Yep.
Let's look at 11 through 20 here. Marvin Harrison Jr., rookie, almost makes the top 10 there. 12, Brandon Ayuk. 13, Nico Collins. We know how good that Texans core is. 14, Devontae Adams. 15, Mike Evans. A lot of familiar veteran names. 16, DJ Moore with what we think will be an upgrade at quarterback, and Caleb Williams. Michael Pittman Jr. at 17. Stephon Diggs, another Texans wide receiver on this list at 18. Deebo Samuel at 19 and Jalen Waddle at 20. So a familiar theme on this list, Matthew, is that it's a lot of guys that are maybe playing alongside a great wide receiver in an offense already, or once upon a time were true wide receiver number ones. And then Marvin Harrison at the top.
Well,
the new kid on the block.
But all of these guys are going to get massive target shares, right? You look here, all of them play with the exception of one or two people that we'll talk about in a second, but all of them are going to play with above average to good quarterbacks. All of them should get massive target shares. And the ones that are on the same team, like Ayuk and Deebo, or Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs, we have belief in those offenses to be able to support multiple fantasy relevant wide receivers. We've seen it in over the years with Cincinnati and Chase and Higgins, right? And so there's lots of different examples. A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith last year, for example. Other examples. Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. On and on and on we go. So Harrison, I just think he's got Kyler Murray, right? And that offense is going to be better than you think, and he's immediately going to be the alpha dog, right? He's immediately, like Connor, you've said it multiple times, best player in the draft.
Yeah, pro ready, everything you want. True number one wide receiver.
Not
Size,
best wide
speed,
receiver, best
player. I thought he was the best player in the draft. Going back to last summer, never moved him off that spot for my board.
Yeah, so we expect obviously, and Kyler Murray's no dummy.
Right. He's going to know where to go throw the ball, especially when he's running for his life.
Exactly. So we'll talk a little bit about Brandon Ayuk. I think, again, this is assuming he starts the season on the 49ers, that he's not traded, and that all gets worked out. But we talked about the easy schedule for the 49ers, at least at the start of the season. Obviously, Brock Purdy fully healthy. He had every game where he got at least 6 targets. He averaged 17.5 fantasy points per game. Big playability, right? Only Tyreek Hill and CeeDee Lamb had more plays of 20 or more yards than Brandon Ayuk last year. Led all players in terms of yards per target last season, so just big playability. Deebo Samuel gets, I think, a lot of publicity because he makes kind of these crazy plays and these runs that, where people are bouncing off of him. But Brandon Ayuk is the number 1 wide receiver on the 49ers. And that's one of the best offenses in football.
Yep. Ayuk is interesting because the advanced stats on him are significantly better than just the counting stats because there are so many superstars on that team. To your point about the yards per target, also 6th in yards per route run, 2nd in PFF grade. This guy's an absolute monster. I just don't think he's being fully maximized in terms of the counting stats he can accrue just because of the other players on that team. But I mean, there is a world where Deebo gets traded, Ricky Pearsall is like the number 2 wide receiver, and then all of a sudden Brandon Ayuk is a top 5 wide receiver in football.
Especially because the way that offense runs, they use Kittle as a blocker a lot more than most pass-catching tight ends. I mean, I don't want to say Kittle's only a pass-catching tight end. He's not, but he's obviously such a weapon in the receiving game. You sort of think, well, what about Kittle? And the fact is that, well, no, because they actually need Kittle. Kittle's actually a great blocker as well as a tight end.
14 on this list, Davante Adams. I mean, questionable quarterback situation. They didn't come out of the draft with one, but at the end of the day, Davante Adams, just the target share he commands each year, Matthew, still highly effective in fantasy.
I went back and looked at this. So yes, questionable quarterback situation from an NFL perspective and knowing that you really want in fantasy, but the fact is we're expecting it to be Gardner Minshew. And last year there were 12 games in which Gardner Minshew started for the Colts. And in those 12 games, Michael Pittman averaged over 10 targets a game, over 7 receptions a game. Is Gardner Minshew great? No, he is not. Is he good enough to get the ball to an alpha wide receiver? He is. He showed it last year with with Michael Pittman. I mean, we've seen it at various times, in whether it was in Jacksonville or a couple games with Philadelphia a couple games ago. So Davante Adams, who has 4 straight years with 100 plus receptions, he's still Davante Adams. And again, they play in a dome. And they play in a dome, by the way, in the fantasy playoffs 3 straight games. So I just think people are going to be, I think Davante Adams might be of value this year because people are going to say, they want to run. Davante Adams is old. We're over it.
Yeah, they took Brock Bowers.
Whatever. He's got Minshew throwing to him. There's nothing sexy about Davante Adams, but he's on a pure talent basis. He's still one of the best wide receivers in the NFL.
Yeah. It's also he didn't have a bad year last year. It feels like he had a bad year. He still went over 100 receptions, over 1,100 yards, 8 touchdowns. And I think, to your point about Minshew, the sins of Gardner Minshew are these individual moments of madness. It's the turnovers or it's getting strip sacked or it's how did you not see that guy, Gardner? But he can make the throws. Unless it's the Tyler Goodson
I was just going to say, or throwing it just behind Tyson Goodson when the season's on the line. Right.
He will be able to get Davante Adams his stats.
I think one of the more tricky ones on this list, guys, is Stephon Diggs, because down the stretch last year, Matthew, Stephon Diggs looked nothing like the player we're used to seeing. And while we love that he plays with C.J. Stroud now, he was already playing with Josh Allen. This wide receiver room is very crowded with talent. And that's not just factoring the guy you have ahead of him in Nico Collins, but the return of Tank Dell.
Yeah, I mean, it is fascinating. I think that from the Texans' point of view, you make the trade for Stephon Diggs and you pay the money because you have C.J. Stroud. You've struck gold with C.J. Stroud and you have him on a rookie deal. So your window to win is right now because you're going to have to pay Stroud at some point, obviously. So your window to win is right now. It's worth noting the Texans ranked 8th in wide receiver target share last year. This is a guy in Stephon Diggs, 4 straight years with 100 receptions and 150 targets. At least 150 targets in 4 straight years. We always talk about targets are earned. And so I get it. He was brutal down the stretch last year. He wasn't even a top 40 wide receiver on a points per game basis over his final 8 games. But I don't think you make that trade if you're the Texans. If you're DeMeco Ryans or you're Bobby Slowick, you don't make that trade unless you're going to make Stephon Diggs a thing. The issues in Buffalo weren't quiet. We know it. Everyone saw the tweets. Everyone saw how it just went south down the stretch. Yeah. So you don't disrupt a young team with a problem if you're not going to feed the guy the ball. And so I think the trade of Diggs does a couple of things. I think number one, it's another veteran weapon for C.J. Stroud. They want to throw the ball. and it also protects against Tank Dell health, right? I mean, like, who knows how will Tank Dell be ready for the season,
It's a
etc.
160-pound receiver. I mean,
100% right. So, and there's always it's like kind of a chicken or egg thing. You can make the argument, oh, well, now he's got a lot more target competition. Well, also, by the way, he's also going to see a lot more single coverage. Like, if you're a defensive coordinator, you're sitting there like, all right, I got to deal with Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs, and Nico Collins. One of those guys is going to be in single coverage on every play. And so, and with Stephon Diggs, he's a guy that has the ability to make your week on one play. All he needs is one play. He's got that kind of big play ability. So, you feel like if you're the Texans, like, even though the volume may not be there as much, the matchups are so much better that, maybe he makes up for it in efficiency. It will be fascinating to see what the Texans offense looks like with him and a healthy Tank Dell and a second-year C.J. Stroud. I'm at 18. That's the lowest I've had Stephon Diggs in quite some time.
Yeah. I think the concern would be, and it's obvious, there is a material chance he's the third most talented wide receiver on that team. The way that Tank Dell was playing before he got hurt, he was playing like a monster. I think Nico Collins is just better than Stephon Diggs at this point. And I think that's kind of inarguable, unless you think there was something physically wrong with Diggs after week 6 or 7 last year. So that would be the concern. And I don't know, I just feel like there's a lot of 6 for 66 type of weeks coming for Diggs. And I think they're going to run the ball. I thought they ran the ball too much last year in Slowick's offense. They got Joe Mixon in there, but certainly Diggs, he's a very high variance player. Like, he could just be Stephon Diggs again, and he could be wide receiver 8.
That's why I'm at 18. I'm at 18. I'm making the case for Diggs.
Yeah.
Understand I also have him in a dynasty league, so I need him to be good desperately. I traded for him in the middle of the season last year, and only to watch him tank. And, I was first place at the beginning of the year. I was first place in the middle of the season, traded for Diggs, like, oh, this is going to put me over the top. Ended up finishing 4th. Thanks, Stephon Diggs. Had some bad injuries down the stretch, too. What are you going to do? But I'm clearly over it, so that's great. So I'm making the case for Diggs because I believe in my heart I want this to happen. But I completely agree. Like, him being a top 5 wide receiver wouldn't shock me. Him being the guy we saw down the stretch and being like, wide receiver 35 or 40 also wouldn't shock me. Very high variance there, but I'm at 18 because, honestly, if you look who I have after him, Deebo Samuel, also high variance. He's somebody that deals with injuries and could be on a different team, right? Jalen Waddle. Jalen Waddle had,
Gets banged up.
He gets banged up, and he had games where he just completely disappeared last year as well, fantasy-wise. So I feel really good about 1 through 17, and then
we're gonna see what happens.
Then we'll mess around and find out. Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBCSports.com and Rotoworld.com, and I want to thank you so much for watching whatever it is you just watched, or if nothing else, being too lazy to click out of the autoplay after this video started, after whatever it is you actually wanted to watch finished. But now that you're here, I'd like to take a moment here to ask you respectfully now, okay? I'm asking you respectfully to subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel. You'll get the latest Roto-World fantasy news headlines, all sorts of great shows, including my own Fantasy Football Happy Hour. So go subscribe now. Again, I'm asking respectfully.